Hello and welcome back to our cottage garden. It's time for our August tour now, and you've joined us on a lovely sunny evening at golden hour, and the light is particularly lovely. Don't be fooled though, we have had quite a windy and grey and miserable month so far. It's been really good for the grass and for the new plants, but it hasn't been that enjoyable to spend time outside, so we've been definitely making the most of it when it's like this. August so far has been a month of celebrating. So it was my birthday a couple of days ago, and we went for a picnic in one of my favourite gardens, and then we went to Wales and went on one of the fastest zip lines, which was amazing. But the weather was awful, and we basically went on a massive zip line through a storm. So it was cold and wet, but still a really, really fun experience. We also hit our YouTube milestone of 100,000 subscribers, so thank you so much if you've joined us recently, and also thank you to those of you that have stuck around for longer as well. We're so over the moon to have gotten 100k, and next week we're getting a plaque from YouTube as well, so I might be able to show you a video of that if it arrives before I get this video out, but otherwise I'll show you it on a post on YouTube as soon as it arrives. If you watched our last video, you'll know that this year our vegetables have been a little bit slow, but thankfully we've had some really nice harvests from our fruit trees, which have still made it feel like it's worthwhile. So we had some gorgeous peaches and some damsons from the trees that line the garden. The damsons are still going, and we're getting a good handful of those every day. We've had some cherries from our dwarf cherry tree, a couple of figs so far with lots left to go, and some raspberries as well from our raspberry canes. So fruit harvests have been really, really good so far, and thankfully, as I'll show you later on, the vegetable patch seems to be catching up too. Before I show you around the garden though, please do subscribe if you enjoy watching these videos. It really helps the channel out, and if you'd like to support us further, you can join our Patreon and you'll get your name in the credits at the end of the video too. The link is in the video description. Now let's have a look around the garden. So in this lower part of the garden, I finally finished the yew hedge that I've been talking about for the last probably 4 months. I had 3 or 4 more hedges to get in, and it was taking me ages to get them in just because they were so heavy, but I bit the bullet and got them in. Unfortunately, I did lose a couple of our rose plants in this process, and I know you're not supposed to move roses in summer, but it was a risk I was willing to take in order to get these hedges in. I think I moved about 7 roses. 2 of which I believe have died. One's definitely died. The second one is clinging on for dear life, and I don't think it's going to make it. The others are all fine, which is kind of miraculous. But sadly, we have potentially lost our really beautiful Olivia Rose Austin standard, which had been in the ground for about 4 years, and it had reached a really lovely size. I've still got it in the ground behind me, but I just don't think it's going to make it. So I will replace that in the winter with a bare root rose, because it was one that was really, really beautiful and I definitely want to keep in the garden. But unfortunately, wasn't able to save it this time. I think it would have been fine if I'd moved it in the winter perhaps, but I didn't want to wait. I wanted to get this hedge done so it can start growing. Then we took a trip to our local nursery and picked up some cottage garden perennials to fill the space in front of these hedges. And this isn't going to be a permanent planting because these hedges will get quite big. They might dominate this border within the next few years. So this is kind of a 3 to 5 year plan, I suppose, until these hedges get really nice and big. But we've got cottage garden favourites in here, some geraniums at the front. We've got some lovely delphiniums that are this really beautiful soft pink colour. Absolutely love that colour. We've got 4 roses, which I've moved from a shadier part of the garden where they really weren't very happy, and I think they'll be much happier here for the sunlight. We have some Nepeta and some salvias here as well. The smaller plants, like the delphiniums, I've put 2 or 3 in one area so that it pads out the space faster, and then the things that will spread quite quickly, like the salvias and the Nepetas, I've just put 1 in, and hopefully next year they'll look a bit fuller. But borders never look great when you've just planted them, so it doesn't look that interesting right now, but I'm hoping next year this will look really lovely. With the other borders that I've planted, they do look quite good after just a year, so watch this space and this will look lovely next year, I hope. Behind me you can see we have a mallow that survived the winter. I planted loads of mallows around the garden and only 2 of them survived, so we've got a pink one behind me there, and then a really, really lovely soft pink one at the top of the garden that I'll show you when we get there too. We've also got lots of yarrow that's flowering at the moment and spreading really successfully, which is great. The lamb's ear plant is flowering too, and the lavender is flowering as well, and that variety is called headcott. We have seen the pollinators pick back up in the last couple of weeks, which is a massive relief, because if you watched our July video, we couldn't see many pollinators at all, and we were scared that something has gone awfully wrong. But thankfully the numbers seem to be picking up a bit now. Now let's move up the garden and I can show you another area that I've recently planted. So you can see here we're under the shade of this smoke tree that's above us, and when we first moved in it was dappled sunlight here, but this tree has grown quite a lot and shaded this area out almost entirely. So I've had to rethink about what I've got planted here, and a family member gave us some hostas from their garden which were really, really lovely and in pots, really nice big root systems. So we lifted them out of the pot and divided them, and we've got most of them in here. Again, this is a case of it's not looking particularly lovely now that it's newly planted and that the plants are recently divided. You can see some of the old foliage isn't looking too happy, but the new growth at the base of the plant is starting to appear, and it's looking really lovely. So again, next year this should look really nice, but I wanted to show you a kind of work in progress anyway. I've also popped some evergreen ferns at the back. These are semi-evergreen, so they should give us some interest over the winter. I love ferns and I think they're really, really beautiful, so I can't wait for these to grow. And I think I will try and get a mulch of some wood chips down on the soil as well, to stop the weeds from germinating, because once you've disturbed the soil, it's quite likely that you might get some weed growth, and I can see a few things popping up already. So I will try and get some wood chips down, but really, really happy with these hostas. We only had a couple of plants before, so it's good to have a bit more variety in the garden and a nice way to make use of the shade too. Before I got these in the ground, this is where I actually had the roses that I've moved into the area that I showed you at the start of the video. And you can see they weren't happy with the lack of sunlight here as this tree above us got bigger. But that's the thing with gardening, you do have to adapt as the conditions change. And so hopefully this setup will be more rewarding for the plants. I just wanted to quickly show you the progress on this new border that we planted in spring, because I have been showing this to you in every monthly tour. I also have been mentioning that these were echinacea, but it turns out they are rudbeckia. I think I planned on planting echinacea and then must have changed my mind at some point. So these have started flowering now and they're really, really lovely. The yarrow is flowering as well. We've got the Japanese anemones are also almost ready to flower. So maybe give this a week or two and it will start to look really showy. But I am so excited to see the asters that we've got at the back of this border. I think I've got about two or three different varieties in here and a number of plants. But I'm really excited to see these because I've never grown asters before, and they're such a generous flower for the end of summer as everything else starts to dwindle. They should give us some really lovely pops of pink and purple. So I'm very excited to see those. And it shouldn't be long now. They've got lots of buds on the top. And one thing that's really amazed me in this border so far is the perennial sunflower at the back that's just started flowering. Not quite in full bloom yet. But this was one that we bought from someone's back garden in a really tiny pot. I'm going to say 1 litre or 2. I think it was probably just 1 litre. But it's given us a really sizable plant even in just a few months of being in the ground. So obviously came from a loving home and some good quality soil, and can't wait to see this develop. I've had to be quite thorough with weeding this area because again the soil was really disturbed when we got the new hedges in and weeds are popping up left, right and centre. But I'm just keeping an eye on it and doing a bit of work when I get time. But it's starting to look lovely and the flowers are well on their way. So I hope to show you this in full bloom in the next video. So you might notice that our duck flock has increased in size by 2. So we picked these 2 new ones up from a farm nearby. We've called them Dolly and Patch. So Dolly is the lighter one and Patch is the slightly darker one, but they look very similar in terms of their markings. The only difference is one is slightly darker than the other. And they're the same age from the same batch of eggs, so they are remarkably similar, and sometimes they even move in the same way when they're walking around the garden, very much in sync with each other. They were very shy when we first got them. So I think we got them about a week or two ago now. It took about 5 days to integrate them with the other ducks, and we had to have a divider up in the house so that they can look at each other without getting too aggressive. It's quite hard to introduce new ducks to a flock without the original flock getting agitated, so we had to be quite sensitive about that. But 4 or 5 days in, they'd completely accepted each other, and we could remove the divider and they'd become one group. And the new ones are a lot less shy. They're not tame yet, but they wouldn't have done this within the first week of getting them. They would have run and hid under a hedge. It was quite sad to watch how shy they were at the beginning. So it's really, really lovely to see them out and enjoying the garden now. They're girls and they're Indian runner ducks like the others. So they should lay eggs probably next year now. It might be too late in the year for them to start. We might get a few random eggs over the winter. We'll see. And if you watched our last video, you might remember we were telling you that our duck Coco potentially had a tumour and was potentially quite poorly. She seems way better now, so we're not sure what's going on there. She might be completely fine. Who knows? We're just going to keep an eye on her. But she seems really well and happy, as you can see in front. The new ducks do differ from the old ones in some ways, and we've noticed that they're a little bit more destructive around the garden. So our original 3, they're actually quite delicate. They don't eat our vegetable plants. They left a lot of things alone in the pond. But the new 2 will eat absolutely everything, and they are not frightened of going into the polytunnel or the shed or places where we might have seedlings. So we're going to have to be a little bit more cautious now what we're doing with our tender plants and our vegetable plants and keep things protected. But we had all of them on the pond, and the new 2 have stripped the pond bare. They've eaten absolutely every pond plant that we had. For some reason, the original 3 didn't care. They left the plants in there, but we're going to have to figure out a new routine with how we let them use the pond, I think. Seeing as we have the new ducks, we've also got our friend to build a new house for them. So it looks a lot nicer than the one that me and Aaron hastily built when we realised that there were foxes in the garden and we need to keep them safe when we're not out here with them. He's done it in the same style as our shed. So it kind of looks a bit like a cloister. It has arched windows. It's not finished yet, so this is a sneak preview. It still needs some roof tiles and some heavy-duty mesh to go on the front. So it still looks a little bit weird where we've got our old chicken wire in there, but it will get better. You'll also notice that it currently looks really dark, and we are going to ask our friend to put a skylight in just to let some more light in there, because I think it is just far too dark. We didn't realise just how dark it would be when we put a roof on. So we'll get that sorted. One thing that was important to us with the new duck house was changing the watering system. So at the moment they have a small kind of paddling pool in there that we change the water every day, and it gets very muddy and it's not great for them in winter if they have to go into flock down. So we've had some water buckets built into the side that the ducks will have enough access that they can dip their eyes and nose in so that they can clean their eyes and flush out their nostrils, but they won't be able to climb in and splash. And this should keep the pen more clean, and we will let them onto the grass so that they can have a splash and they can go in the pond and get clean properly when they're not in the pen. It should mean that their pen is much more hygienic and easy to maintain. The ducks have actually started molting as well, which is quite early. It's normally the end of summer or the start of autumn. They will drop their feathers and grow new ones, and while they're doing that they'll stop laying because their body is busy growing feathers. So that started and does mean that there's feathers all over the ground. It looks like a duck has been attacked by a fox, but it's normal. It's just part of their process. So I imagine that's been triggered by the cooler temperatures. We're really excited to have these new ducks though. It's always good fun getting a new pet, and we can't wait to learn more about them and get to know their personalities a bit. But let's leave the ducks down here where they can have a forage, and I will show you how it's going with our fruit and veg in the polytunnel. So August is probably the best month in the polytunnel for things like tomatoes and cucumbers. And you can see we've got loads of tomatoes now that we're just waiting for them to finish ripening. If you watched last month's tour, I mentioned that I was actually worried about whether or not these were going to get pollinated due to the lack of pollinators. But I've seen so many insects in here this month, it's been really reassuring. I have left the polytunnel to be quite weedy and wild. I did a massive clear up in here today, so this is actually about as good as it gets. But it was very weedy. But one thing I have noticed in doing that is that there is a lot of insect activity in here, and I think that just brings in the food chain, and ultimately it brings in the predators too. So it means there's a really healthy ecosystem in here, and it kind of takes care of itself, and we don't really have much in the way of pests. We do struggle with the cabbage white caterpillars, but I am really embracing them this year, and I'm letting them eat whatever they want to. I just think there's such a concerning lack of butterflies. If they want to eat my crops, they're very much welcome to if it means that they're going to survive in the garden. I'm doing things like leaving cauliflower leaves in the ground after I've harvested the cauliflower so that the caterpillars have something to eat. And you'll notice looking around, there are loads of caterpillars, but I'm really glad to see them. I know some gardeners disagree with that, but they are very much welcome in here. Everything's catching up. It does get nice and warm in here, even when it's not too sunny outside. So the cucumbers are doing really well now. It looks like there's one that's even ready to harvest. It's slightly later than I would have liked, but I'm still really, really grateful that it's here. You'll also notice that the grapevine has really put on so much growth this year. It's been amazing. I think I got that one in the ground about 2 or 3 years ago, sometime in the pandemic as a cutting. And it has absolutely thrived this year. I'm so pleased. So I'm going to train that over this crossbar here. And then next year, hopefully we should have some to harvest. There's no sign of fruit on there this year, but I still think it looks really, really beautiful. In terms of tomato varieties, we have 3 this year. So we've got this yellow pear drop variety. I can't remember the exact names. We've got a beefsteak variety, which I believe is this plant here, the slightly unusual shape. And then we've got bog standard red tomato variety as well. I should remember the names, I do apologise, but there's an assortment of different types. The understory is planted with things like nasturtiums, parsley, chamomile, different herbs, and the idea is just that there's strength in diversity. There's also some marigolds in here to help with predator control for the tomatoes. They're a really good companion plant for tomatoes. And then we've got some courgettes at the front, which we finally started harvesting from this week. And courgettes are an amazing thing. It feels like the minute you start harvesting from them, they will not stop, and you could be out here, it feels like every day, picking a new one. So really, really handy to have a couple of courgette plants on the go. At the back of the tunnel, I've got some dahlias that I've left in the ground for 2 or 3 years now. They're not edible, at least the plants aren't edible, but the tubers actually are, though I've never eaten them. I leave them in here just because I don't want to dig them up. And I know they'll survive frosts in here, but might move them one day to make it more of a productive space. The parsley has just sprung up loads in here as well, and it's smelling really amazing. I absolutely love parsley, so that's something I hope to harvest soon. But I'm really pleased with everything in here. It was quite a concerning start to the year, and it's really a relief when you see that things work out at the end. Up in the orchard, the apple trees are doing really well, and we are able to harvest a few already. The fig tree is also doing really well this year, and I love when that happens because figs are one of my favourite fruits. I'm thinking about putting another fig tree in because I love them so much. We don't have any pears this year. Sometimes trees have funny patterns. They have years off. I'm not worried about it. It still looks like a really healthy tree. And the understory is being left alone for the insects. And if you sit there, you can hear the grasshoppers chirping, and you know that there's loads of activity and that they're grateful for the overgrown grass. In terms of planning ahead, August is the time to start sowing greens for overwintering. So I'm going to be sowing some Cavolo Nero and some chard to fill up the space in the tunnel. And as usual, I'll be growing loads of broad beans so that we get an early harvest of those, but also so that they can fix some nitrogen back into the soil. I don't normally start my broad beans until September, October time, so no rush on those, but I will get some chard and kale seeds going soon. But I'm really looking forward to harvesting these tomatoes as they start ripening. It's one of my favourite things in the garden. I just find them such a rewarding plant to grow. And thankfully no signs of blight yet, even though we've had some cold and damp weather. So keep your fingers crossed for the tomatoes, and I'll show you how we get along with those as they start to ripen. I thought I would also show you these borders before it gets dark, and although they aren't finished and they're not really giving a nice full impression like I would like them to, there's definitely some gems in here that I want to share with you. So this is the mallow plant that I referenced at the start of the video. This one's called Barnsley Baby, and I planted this last year, I think, possibly the year before. But I chose this one because it has these really gorgeous, dainty pink-white flowers, and I really, really love mallows, but they don't always survive a frost. So I'm glad this one has made it, and it's just starting to look really lovely as it's beginning to flower. We also have some rudbeckia in here that I grew from seed, started 2 years ago. It's always really rewarding when you see something that you've grown from seed become a really big, colourful plant, and this will come back every year. So I've got some on both sides. Initially, I wasn't super keen to grow yellow plants in the garden, but I think as you get to the end of summer and there isn't much flowering, you do just long for any colour at all, and so I do feel like it's quite welcome in the end. Maybe in the long term I'll swap these out with something pink like echinacea, but for now I'm really happy with them, and they barely cost me anything at all because I grew them from seed. Again, up here you can see the yarrow is doing really well. There's some on both sides, mostly on this side though, and this area is a little bit difficult to garden because the light conditions are so different on either side. This side gets way more sun and that side gets more shade, so it's difficult to achieve symmetry. Thankfully in the cottage garden style you don't really need a lot of symmetry, but I do try to mirror things a little bit where I can. So we've got the perennial sunflower on both sides, and this is just getting ready to flower now. Again, really looking forward to seeing that. It's normally closer to September when it starts to look really showy. We've also got a few more hollyhocks that are yet to flower. Quite late, but I think because I grew those from seed, they might be slightly out of the rhythm with the rest of the garden this year. But where there are gaps in these borders, I'm always grateful to receive recommendations. So if there's anything that you think I should grow here, please do let me know. That's it for our August garden tour though. I hope you've enjoyed having a look around today. And if you haven't already, please do like, comment and subscribe. It really helps the channel out. We'll see you for another garden tour next month when we will have finished the duck house and we can do a reveal and we can enjoy those late summer blooms too.